In our last couple of videos, we looked at higher order polynomials. What is a higher order polynomial? How many zeros can it have? How many x-intercepts can it have? And we looked at using and behavior. But all of those polynomials that we looked at were either already factored, or we looked at a quadratic that we were able to factor. So in our next few lessons, we're going to look at how can we completely factor a polynomial. And the first method we're going to look at is called factoring by grouping. So I want to completely factor a polynomial. F of x equals x cubed plus 7x squared minus x minus 7. And then once we have it factored, we can do all of the things we did in the last video. We can find all of the zeros, find all of the x-intercepts. We can think about the left-right end behavior, find the y-intercept. Both of those we can actually do in this form. But once we've found the x-intercepts and their multiplicity, then we can completely graph the polynomial. Notice that my degree here is cubed. That means that I am looking for 3 factors. That's the only way I can get x times x times x is x cubed with 3 factors. So that means I could have as many as 3 zeros and as many as 3 x-intercepts. I may not have 3 zeros if a 0 is repeated because a factor is repeated. I may not have 3 x-intercepts if a 0 is repeated, or if a 0 is not a real number. It won't show up as an x-intercept. And we'll talk more about that in a later video. So when I say 3 factors, that means exactly 3 factors. But when I say 3 zeros, I mean less than or equal to 3 zeros and less than or equal to 3 intercepts. Okay, we're going to look at the method of factoring by grouping. This method does not always work, but if it does, it's the easiest way to do this. If we have 4 terms, we have 4 terms here, 1, 2, 3, 4. We want to think about the first 2 terms only and factor out the largest possible thing common to both of those. We have x cubed, 7x squared, so we can factor out an x squared. And we're left with an x here and a plus 7. Then we want to look at the second 2 terms and factor out what's common to both of those. And in this case, the only thing common is a negative 1. So I factor out that negative 1, and I'm left with positive x and positive 7. Now notice that I have exactly the same thing right here and right here. When I get to this step, if I do not have exactly the same thing, I either need to look back at the polynomial and make sure that I factored out correctly, or if I cannot get the same exact thing here and here, it will not factor by grouping, and I have to use a different method, which we're going to learn more about in later videos. But because I do have exactly the same thing here and here, I can factor that out. I can factor out that x plus 7 from both, and notice that here I'm left with x squared, and here I'm left with minus 1 when I factor out that x plus 7. And so I have this factored. But this is not completely factored because I still have a square here. So that means this term is not factored. So there's two ways I can go from here. I can either think about, does x squared minus 1 factor? And in this case, it does. We can actually factor that into x plus 1 times x minus 1. The x term cancels because 1x minus 1x is 0. So now I have this completely factored. I'd like you, at this point, to find the zeros, the x-intercepts, the y-intercept, the left, right, and behavior, and we've learned how to do those in the last two videos. And then finally, I want you to graph the polynomial. As you're doing the x-intercepts and the zeros, think about your multiplicity. Think about your cross or tangent behavior. Pause the video, do all of those steps, see if you can graph this polynomial, and then restart the video. All right, so our zeros are going to be -7, -1, and +1 from our factors. Each of those has a multiplicity of 1 because I have an understood exponent of 1 on every one of those. So that means that I will cross at each of those x-intercepts. And all three of those are real numbers, so they do have x-intercepts at each one. My y-intercept, I don't have to multiply back out because I already had it to start with here. So my y-intercept is going to be 0, -7. My left, right, and behavior, I'm looking at my leading term here, which is x cubed, my highest exponented term. And I have an odd number, so that means the behavior is opposite directions. Positive number, positive coefficient, so I'm down left, up right. And then I can draw my graph. I'm going to just go down here and draw my graph. Oops. And I know I'm going down left, up right. I know I'm going to cross. Oh, I forgot my y-intercept. I know I'm going to cross here, loop around, cross at -1, come down, pick up this -7, and then cross at 1, and everything matches up. If your left, right, and behavior and your cross-tangent behavior aren't working out, go back, double check your work to make sure that it all works out and lines up correctly. In our next set of videos, we're going to look at how do I completely factor a polynomial if it does not factor by grouping. And we're going to learn a method